So we're going to get started in a few seconds, just going to let people get into the room. Thanks everybody for showing up.
So excited to be here.
It's so nice to see some familiar faces.
Get started. All right, we'll get started. We have a pretty good crowd in the room right now. Welcome to Exile and Bookbill's Author on Tap reading series. If this is all new to you, my name is Javier Ramirez, and along with Kristen Gilbert, co-run Exile and Bookbill, a virtual bookshop with bookshop.org that will magically become a real live bookstore in Chicago by the end of the summer. So we like to pride ourselves on the strength of our event schedule because we like to present the books and authors that we personally have read and loved. And this event easily fits that bill. But it's always special when we host debut authors on the show, and I feel that we can refer to our featured guests tonight as such. The 9 Lives of Rose Napolitano is Donna Freitas' first adult novel, which just made it out into the world yesterday. So congratulations, Donna.
Thank you.
She is also the author of Consent, a memoir of unwanted attention, as well as books for young readers. Donna has written for the Washington Post, New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, and has appeared on NPR and the Today Show. She's on the faculty at Fairleigh Dickinson University's MFA program and lives in Brooklyn and Connecticut. Donna will be in conversation with the incredibly talented Kimberly King Parsons. Kimberly was born in Lubbock, Texas, and received her MFA from Columbia University. Her fiction has been published in the Paris Review, Best Small Fictions 2017, Black Warrior Review, No Tokens, Ninth Letter, and the Kenyon Review, among others. She's the author of Black Light Stories, which was longlisted for the National Book Award for Fiction in 2019, for which I was lucky enough to be a judge that year, along with my literary heroes. It was a pleasure and honor to read Black Light, pushing along to the long list level. So thanks for being here, Kimberly, and thank you, Donna. We're gonna get started here in a second, but I wanted to let everyone know you can purchase books through the links provided. And I always forget to do this, but I'm going to remember today. This is Donna's book. I have it in ARC form, it comes in hardcover. And here is Black Light. And if you should buy these books, but you will get a nice, well, Donna signed this for me when she sent it to me, thanks to Donna, but we do have signed book plates like that. That will come, we're happy to send those to you should you purchase any of the copies tonight for tonight's event. Thank you guys everyone for tuning in tonight. We encourage you to leave your cameras on, but please stay muted until the Q&A portion should you have any questions. You can put them in the chat and Kimberly will field and put them forth to Donna as the conversation goes on. I'm gonna get out of the way now and pass this along to Kimberly. So enjoy the show. Thanks guys for being here.
Thanks, Javier.
Thank you so much, Javier. Yes, thank you to Javier and Kristen at Exile. And I'm so happy to talk to you tonight, Donna. Congratulations. And I guess the way we're gonna just run it is have a little conversation with the two of us, and then I have my chat open, and as questions come in, I might be asking you questions from the chat, or I might just be asking you questions that I have, but thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be in conversation with you tonight, and I so appreciate Javier for having both of us for this conversation. So
awesome. So first of all, the first thing that I want to convey to anybody who might be watching who's not familiar with the sort of plot line of the 9 Lives of Rose Napolitano is that there's a very inventive structure to the novel. And I was looking at some of your readers, some of your like advanced reviews. People have described it as a sliding doors novel, or what somebody said, a choose your own adventure novel. I was like, that's not quite right. But the idea of sort of illuminating these alternate lives and alternate timelines is obviously like a key point about the book. And I wondered, how do you like to talk about the structure of the book? And maybe even just in terms of, how did you pitch it when you first started talking about it?
I don't know how to pitch books. I mean, I guess I thought of it as I took one woman and I fragmented her into 9. And then there's sort of a way I put her back together, I guess you could say. And I think the structure sort of came from, because I've written so much YA and, children's books. In children's and YA, you sort of learn to take all kinds of risks with your novels. You play around with voices and structure, and every single apparatus a book has, to like the chapter title and section breaks, and so I feel like it sort of flowed naturally from my experiences in YA of playing around with plot and structure. And it was, in some ways, it was kind of a greedy structure. I wanted to tell all the stories, and because I couldn't decide which story to tell when I decided I was going to write about a woman who didn't want children. And so I just found a way to tell all the stories, and it felt like a really exciting structure to me, like a very generous one, I guess, because I feel like there's a way in which you can get away with a lot with your character if you have 9 different versions of her, because in some she can make a lot of mistakes and do things that maybe will upset the reader, but then in other versions, maybe they'll forgive her. So I feel like, so I think it allowed me to write a character that was really human, maybe. I don't know.
No, I love that. I think also, as somebody who writes short stories, is where I'm mostly coming from. Like the idea of the greedy, I love that term, like greedy, because that's what you do with short fiction too. It's like, well, I'm going to try to write, I don't want to just write this type of story. I want to write that type of story and this type of character. And I want to do even third person or first person, or try to fit in as much as you can into a book. So I love that description as greedy. And I think the thing that I loved what you said also about how you get to do things that might potentially upset the reader. Like there may be one version that some readers are sort of put off by because they don't agree with Rose's decision in the moment. But then in the next section, they could be sort of like, she could redeem herself to them, or, it's nice. It's a really interesting way to sort of please a lot of people, frankly, in a really great way. And a lot of times with the traditional novel structure, you're making choices and you're narrowing everything down and you just get the one outcome. And so you could potentially alienate some readers, or I don't know, it's fascinating to me. And also it's so much fun. Which is, these aren't necessarily even, this is serious stuff, a lot of it, and it's someone's marriage and it's these serious decisions, but there's this sense of excitement because there's so much potential and possibility where we're like, what's going to happen next and what's going to happen next? And I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of inciting incident at the center of the book, which is basically this Rose is sort of confronted by her husband Luke because she has these prenatal vitamins that she hasn't been taking as she's supposed to be taking, and then that sort of kicks off that's sort of the center of the inciting event for the novel. And I wondered, to be a woman in the world is to have your body considered. I guess that's a nice way of putting it, but to have your body up for debate or to have your body discussed in certain ways. And that's what was so striking to me about choosing to start with that particular event, because of the way that Luke is sort of asking these questions that you don't often see posed to a man, like in this particular way. But I wondered how you came to that event as your sort of center of the book, and if there had been others that you tried in the process.
Well, I thought, I actually knew immediately that that's where the book was going to start, that it was going to be a fight about something sort of dumb and small, but that was symbolic for the whole marriage. Because I feel like in marriage, people fight, like you fight about something really small, but you're actually really fighting about the entirety of your relationship. And, that very small thing turns out to be like a referendum on your whole marriage. And so the prenatal vitamins, so that part was personal. Like I went through a situation where I was being pressured to take prenatal vitamins and I was resisting them because I was like, like why is someone paying attention to this? And like, I don't want to do this. Why do I have to do this? And actually when I would go to the doctor, the doctor would ask me like, do you want to get pregnant? And I'd be like, no. And then she'd be like, you need to take prenatal vitamins. And I was like, I just told you I don't want to get pregnant. And so I had a lot of doctors like tell me that. And I just remember I was just really angry about them. And even though it was like a tiny thing, it felt really symbolic to me. And so I felt like, okay, like I could see how this marriage could come to turn on this one little thing that she's resisting doing, and that her husband is being so oppressive, right? Like he's like, it starts out, and for those of you who haven't read, the husband has counted the vitamins to see how many she's taken and has figured out that she hasn't been taking them. And so he confronts her when she walks into the bedroom and she realizes that he's counted them. And so, so it kind of felt like, I don't know, like marriage, like I could somehow encapsulate a marriage in that one moment. And so I liked the different ways I can imagine that fight playing out. And so for better or worse, you see that fight over and over and over again, and it has all these different outcomes in the book. So
yeah, I like that it is a smaller thing too. I mean, it's both, as you said, it's a smaller thing that sort of represents this much bigger thing. And I think I was joking with my partner that every marriage has like 4 fights, and you just have the same 4 fights over and over again. But I like the idea of like, these vitamins are sort of a small thing, right? I mean, because it seems small, but then when we start to realize how long and how this pertains to her in-laws and her own decisions and her choices and her childhood and all of these things, it becomes so big. I felt like it was a perfect place to start from. And I like that you said that this was something that was sort of based in real life for you. I'm a person, for better or worse, who sort of, I don't think a lot about like big decisions, especially. I really go with my gut, and I never sit around and think about like what could have been, what might have been. That's just not my personality. But I think that this year for 2020, we all had a different idea of what our 2020 was going to be like, perhaps. And so I definitely got this sense of, I would have been doing this on this day, or this, I'm supposed to be doing this, or this time last year I was doing this. Like, I feel like everyone's timeline got very fractured this year. And I wonder if you personally are someone who thinks a lot about decisions or thinks about alternates, when you're just in your personal life. Like, do you feel like you consider those things?
I wish I had a gut feeling about big decisions. I'm definitely someone who lies awake at night and plays out every different possible scenario, which is why the structure was so fun for me. Because when I knew, okay, I'm going to write about this woman whose marriage has come to rest on whether or not she changes her mind about having a child, I kept thinking, well, which version am I going to write? Am I going to write the one where she has the baby and then her marriage falls apart, or she has the baby and she's so happy, or she has the baby, or she refuses to have the baby and her marriage falls apart, or she refuses to have the baby and then her husband falls apart? Like, so I had all these different, I just had all these different ideas in my head, and I used to lie awake at night thinking about all these things, like what would happen if I do this, and would it ruin my life, would it make my life? And so it felt really exhilarating to get to find a way to tell all the different stories. But it definitely came from the fact that I have no gut. I wish I had a gut. I keep thinking about what you said earlier about short stories and finding a way to really sort of get everything you can out of a short story. And this is why I think I can't write short stories, is because there's not enough space for me to play out all the different possibilities of what I want to say. Or it seems like it's such a it's an intimidating genre for me because of the compactness of the space. And I feel like writing novels themselves, I think, are generous because they let you they give you a lot of space to play out all of these issues. And I feel like for this particular topic, which is also, it's not just about the choice to have a child, it's also about, motherhood and career and family and friendship. And I feel like there was no way I couldn't fit it into one storyline, never mind like one tiny space of a short story.
Well, right. And you're saying, I like that too, the idea of a novel being a more, it is generous because there's plenty of room even in a novel for contradiction, right? Like you can have a character who's acting one way in one half of the book and then sort of changing the way that they act. Or some, there's a lot of room for contradiction because there's more space. But in your book, especially, you get to do all kinds of stuff. Like it's such a dream, really, because you get to sit there and maybe that's part of it too, is that sort of exuberance. Because I imagine, and I want to know, that could be my next question, was this fun to write? Because there's this part of me that feels like, because of the fact that there's all these possibilities and that you do get to kind of try different things, that there's this sort of exhilaration of choice that's there. And I wondered if that's how you felt as you were actually piecing it together, putting it together.
I think the novel it did feel fun to write. It also felt like a relief to write, because I felt like I suddenly have this space to say all these things that I didn't feel like I could say in real life, and I could say them through my character. And I think it was fun to imagine Rose, my character, without children, and Rose, my character, with a child. So I enjoyed that experience. So to imagine what it would be like to have a daughter. But I think the book also felt incredibly cathartic for me, or it kind of felt like a gift, because one of the major parts of the book is Rose's own relationship with her mother. And that part of the book, I think, is my favorite part of the book, their relationship and her relationship with her parents. But my mother died, I think it's 18 years in this June. So it was a long time ago. And I feel like Rose has all the conversations with her mother that I didn't get to have with my mother. And I don't think I realized that that's what I was doing until the book was finished. And like, it was finished by like a long time. And then Pam, my editor, who makes you read your book like 15 times before it gets published, which was very intense. On my very last read, when I read it, and it was, it looked like the book pages. So I was reading it in galley pages. I wept through like half of it, which is not normal to read, like to weep during my own book. Like it was sort of a weird thing. I was embarrassed at first. I was like, why am I crying? It's my own book. But at one point I sort of looked up from the book and I thought, oh, like, I guess I really wrote the book I needed. Mm-hmm. So I feel like those conversations that Rose has with her mother were in some ways the conversations I wish I could have had with mine. So that part felt, I guess, really good. And I feel really proud of this book, but I feel really proud of that part of the book, her relationship with her mom.
Yeah, well, also that I like that, people tend to forget that when you're writing a book about motherhood, you mean not just your decision to have a child or not, but you mean your mother, like your actual mother has a huge part of how we view motherhood in general and what that means. And those were my favorite parts of the book as well. I wondered if there were so we have 9 timelines of Rose, but I wondered if there were others that you wrote that didn't make it in, or that you, did you get all of them out, or are there 9 more somewhere off to the side?
There were ones that I just knew. Like I knew that I was like, okay, she's gonna do this, she's gonna do this, she's gonna do this. So I don't want to give them all away.
Sure, yeah.
But there were certain topics I felt like I couldn't quite pack into the book as much as I wanted to. Like I was imagining there was gonna be a much broader like adoption storyline, and there's a little bit in there, but it's not as much as, I thought there would be. And there's a way in which in certain versions, like Rose and Luke are living parallel lives a little bit, or they're making parallel, perhaps not great decisions for their lives. But I'm trying to think if I have favorites in some ways. I feel like there are ones where Rose really makes some bad choices, and I kind of think those are my favorites. But I also yeah. Well, I guess she kind of makes bad choices throughout. But I really enjoy.
I'm sorry. Hello. Sorry. Hold on, wait, one second. I'm gonna. Sorry about that. Yeah. Speaking of children and how they bring so much different, there's another timeline where I'm just sitting here talking to you without a small child in the room with me. Yeah, I think that there's, I have my favorites as well. And I loved how towards the end, some of the things that I wasn't sure if you were going to have a chance to explore got explored, some of the other timelines. And again, I don't want to give them away because I think that that's part of the joy of reading the book is discovering all the different paths that Rose takes. One of my sort of like joys as one of the thrills of my life was going to Faulkner's house at Roanoke in Oxford, Mississippi, and seeing behind his, in his room where he had written out the chronology of a fable on the wall, like this sort of external map of what he was trying to do. And I wondered if you had any sort of off-screen organizational methods for how you did this, like how did you put it all together? Was it something that you knew right away, like these are the timelines and this is how they go, or did you have to keep track of it?
I've gotten asked this question a lot, and one of my editors, my UK editor, actually, she made like a color-coded like map of the book when she was editing and sent it in case, it was useful to me. And then someone else made another sort of map, and everybody keeps asking me if I had a map, and I did not. And I've been thinking about why for a while now, because I've been asked this forever, like since the book got bought, and then other people so I think it's because I'm a math person. So I've started to think a lot about how storytelling is a lot like math. And I was a total math geek in high school. And then I almost became, at one point, there was a possibility of me being a math major in college. And I've always loved word problems. Like I loved figuring out the speeding boat, all that stuff. But I can always see everything three-dimensionally in my head. And so I just could see all the 9 lives. Like I knew where they were and how they were playing out in my brain. Kind of like, I was describing this last night. It's kind of like, if you suddenly know the answer to a math problem, you would write the answer down, and then your teacher would make you show the work, and you'd have to go through all the steps. I was one of the people who like jumped ahead, and then I'd have to show my work. And I feel like that's kind of like in some ways what storytelling is for me, because I also happen to, when I write, I will often write like 30 or 40 pages, and then I'll jump ahead and I'll write the end, and then I write toward it. And so I just kind of had them all there three-dimensionally in my head and just kept track of them. And so, but I didn't really think about storytelling as math until this book. But I think it's always been that way for me. And I think that is always why I have loved plot so much. Like plot is my favorite thing. I love figuring out the plot because I think that's also kind of like math. I don't know if you feel that way as a writer.
I love that that's so fascinating to me because that's the opposite for me. I never know what I'm doing. I never have any idea. There's like some sort of dark shape in the center that I'm stabbing at. I don't know. I feel like your way sounds like it's just fascinating because I'm terrible at math. So maybe those things are related. But I love that idea of the, mapping it all out and seeing it, being able to see it from that perspective. And that's, I think, that's part of it too. That's part of what makes it so exciting to read, I think, is to sort of, because I wasn't as a reader, I wasn't keeping track of each story. I wasn't saying to myself, like, how is life 3 different from life 6? Or I wasn't doing that. I just sort of let it wash over me at a certain point, which I found to be I really loved reading it that way, because by the end, I got a sense of a more complete life, almost just like one very complete life, even though it was made up of all these different parts. I didn't have the urge to sort of like, I saw someone very sweet on your Goodreads said, like, they love this book and they're like, keep a notebook handy so you can write down the lives. I was like, that's so cute. I love the idea of that, keeping track in that way. For me, I just sort of like to sit and let the whole experience kind of wash over me. But yeah, that's so fascinating about math. I noticed in your acknowledgements that you thanked your agent first. And you said something, I'm going to just read what you said. It was like, through thick and thin, so much thin, which I love, because any writer knows that there are thick and thin moments in this business. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, your relationship with your agent and how, and maybe, I don't know if your agent saw this in drafts before it was shopped to your editor, or how that worked. And just, I would love to hear, I feel like people don't talk enough about the agent-author relationship, and I wanted to just see what you had to say.
That's such a nice question. And I love my agent so much. She and I have been together for like 17 or 18 years now. So it's kind of like a literary marriage. I feel like we're married. And she has represented all my different kinds of books. She's my agent, but she's also become one of my most wonderful friends over the years. And I feel like we've been through so much together, and she's just been such a positive force in my life. And one of my favorite things about Miriam, that's my agent, is if there's an event like BEA, which for those of you who don't know, it's like this big bookseller event at the Javits Center in New York, and like every publisher comes. One of the things Miriam has done is she'll meet me on the floor at BEA, and she'll walk me around and introduce me to everybody she knows, and they'll all be like, Donna, we've heard so much about you. Like, she's such a cheerleader of her authors, I think. So she's just really wonderful. But so when I did this book, I think at some point I was like, yeah, hey, Miriam, I'm kind of writing an adult novel. And she was like, oh, well, interesting. That's great. And then when I turned it into her, she kind of freaked out about it in a really good way. She was like, Donna, this is an important book. And I was like, is it? Do you think someone will want it? Because, I was writing an adult novel and I didn't know people would want it. And she was really excited about it. She was incredibly supportive. And, I think she's been with me through all these different turns in my career, and, all these different genres that I've moved in and out of, and she supported all of them. And so I feel like no matter what in my writing life, because of Miriam, I'm not alone. Because she's always, I feel like your agent ideally should be your cheerleader. And I feel like I've had this enduring cheerleader in my life. So I'm very grateful to her. So I thank her in all my books. I've like dedicated a few of them to her, and I'm sure she'll get a couple more at some point. So
that's really awesome. I love that so many years have passed, and I think it is like a marriage, for better or worse. I think it's like this is your marriage, this is your relationship, and that's so great. I wondered also then, just while we're talking about people, because I think sometimes people forget how many people are involved with bringing a book to light, about your relationship with your editor, and maybe also I think it's always fascinating to hear how is the draft that is published that we're reading a lot different than the draft that was sold to your editor, or were there a lot of changes made along the way, or is it pretty similar?
I would say the biggest change is the storyline about Rose and her mother, which is, so I really, in the first draft of the book, I sort of didn't go there with Rose and her mom. I kind of like skirted around it. And I think because it was intense to write the relationship between her and her mother, even though it turned out to be like my favorite part of the book. But that was Pam, my editor. That was the big thing she wanted me to do in the revision, other than actually make the husband less villainous. He was pretty villainous in the first draft of the book. I had to work really hard on Luke, the husband, to make him a three-dimensional character. So I worked on him a lot, but I would say the storyline that changed the most is the one with Rose and her mother, and all of the conversations that they have. But the general structure of the book, all the things that happened though, like those were there. And mostly what I did, as I'm sure you do too, as I picked at every sentence, like I feel like every sentence that's in the book needs to be in the book. Like I cut I'm a pretty ruthless reviser. So I really try to take away words, any extra words that don't need to be there. because I write long in my first drafts, and then I sort of pare back. And one of the reviewers called my prose precise. And I was like, yes, that's because Pam made me go over the book a million times. And so the sentences are very precise. So I feel proud of how the book came out. But it's mostly was there. And then, a lot of it was just like cutting away extra things and really bringing out Rose's relationship with her mom.
That's awesome. And how long was the process, would you say, from start to finish of writing even the long draft, maybe just the first draft?
I wrote it really fast. I'm a fast first drafter. So I wrote it in about 2 months. I kind of wrote it like I need. So that's how I write almost everything. And then I spend like a year revising them. But I usually have very intense drafts. So like once I knew what I was going to do, and once I had the structure, I just sat down and I wrote, and that's my favorite way to write. Like I get up every morning and I'll write for like 2 or 3 hours and like not look up. Like I'm just really focused. So it's always very intense. And then I write every day too. I don't take any days off until the book is done.
I was going to ask you that about your process. So you're writing in the morning, every morning, first thing before you do anything else in your day. Is that how it goes?
Except for coffee. I have coffee and I read. I read until whatever book I'm reading, I read until I get in the mood to write. And then I'll sometimes alternate between writing and reading. So.
Were there any books that you read either while you were writing or just books that you return back to that inspire you when you're writing? Because this book doesn't really, there's not a book like this, right? There's nothing that you can look to say, how did somebody else write their alternate life book? It's different. So I imagine that there wasn't like one particular model, but are there books that you return to sort of inspire your own work?
Well, when I was working on the book, a friend of mine told me I had to read Kate Atkinson's Life After Life. I had already been like deep into the book. And so I started reading it, maybe I was like halfway through. And so that was a book. So it turns out like Life After Life is one of my favorite books ever. It's such an incredible book. I don't know if those of you who are here, if you've read it or not, but it's a really extraordinary book where a woman keeps waking up. Well, she keeps being born and then dying again and again. And during World War II, and her life has to do with World War II. But that was a book I really enjoy. But generally, I try to read novels that have really strong voices, because I like to read first person when I'm writing fiction. And I really enjoy, I like books that play around with structure too, or play around with voices. One of my favorites last year that I read was Fleischman is in Trouble, which had it switches between third person and first person, and it's just a really interesting, strong voice. So, and it's an interesting structure. So I tend to gravitate toward those kinds of books. Sea Wife, that was another one that I really adored last year by Amity Gage. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that reading those types of books sort of gives you when you just see that other people are doing things, you're like, I can do whatever I want. I can just move in this direction. It's almost like that there's sort of permission there if you just see, even if it's not exactly what you're trying to do, but just to see how they've managed to do it. And I wonder if, I was looking to see if there are any, I guess I should make another little announcement. If anyone has any questions, you can leave them in the chat and I will get to them, because I'm getting to the end of my questions here. And so we can go to audience questions if anyone has any. I guess, one last thing. I loved how you write about Barcelona, which there's this really great, it's sort of like one of my favorite Rose moments is her being in Barcelona with her aunt, and this sort of just this sort of carefree moment. And I love the way you wrote about Barcelona. And I was like, I bet Donna's been to Barcelona. And I was wondering if you, and there's Rome where they're on their honeymoon or remembering their honeymoon while they're in Rome, and sort of she and Luke are together on a balcony in Rome. And I was wondering if you've traveled to these places, and if you brought a sense of place, in this as well. And I wondered how much of that comes from your real life as well.
Well, I have a pretty close connection to Barcelona. So my husband is a Spanish citizen, and even though he's Chilean, and we, except for last year during the pandemic, we go to Barcelona every year and we spend a lot of time there. And there have been years when I've been there for like 9 months out of the year. So I know Barcelona really well. And while I've been there, we visited a lot of other places. And so I've had friends who've been in Rome, and I would go see them in Rome. And so, it's funny, the Barcelona chapter, I felt like, it would be fun to like throw this in here, because Barcelona is like my happy place. And so, I can't be sad in Barcelona. And I felt like this would be a good place for Rose to go to make herself feel better. And at one point it's funny, I think it's like my editor's favorite chapter, or one of her favorite chapters, and I almost cut it. And she was like, no, not the Barcelona chapter. So, but I'm glad that the sense of place really comes through. Ooh, I see a question from Bridge. My friend Bridge is up there. I see her face. It's so nice.
I was in Barcelona with you like 25 years ago. 30, maybe 30 years ago.
It was a long time ago.
I spent the summer in Barcelona, and it's beautiful, and I love it.
I don't mean to jump in. I put a question in the chat, but I don't know if you're ready for.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to just ask it, Bridget, or do you want me to read it?
No, I was just curious, Donna. You part of your strength and interest is writing in so many genres, and so it seems natural. But I'm just curious, like, did you have to, consciously use more mature themes and bigger words, or did you catch yourself sort of writing for teens at different points? What was that like?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, so I guess the way that YA writers think of writing YA is that there's nothing off limits. You don't have to worry about your language. You do a little bit in middle grade, but in YA you can really do anything you want. The real difference, I would say, is in the age of the protagonist. And your protagonist can't have the mindset of like a 50-year-old woman. Like, so they can't think like an older person. But I would say, like, it was really exhilarating to get to write, as an adult, or like with adult themes. So I knew this book was obviously going to be a novel for adults because I was talking about motherhood. But one of the things I thought a lot when I was writing was like, oh, this is such a YA novel that I'm writing, in the sense that I feel like so much of YA is voice, structure, and I sort of have these rules for myself of like each chapter I have to hook the reader. Like, I think of it as like a fishing expedition. And that comes from YA. I feel like in YA, we think so much about how do we hold the kids' attention? And, it's just I guess like I'm such a YA writer because I've written so many YA novels. And so I feel like all those instincts I have as a novelist come from my experience writing YA. But I mean, I think they work for adult novels too, but it felt like to me, I was using all the skills I had as a YA novelist to write this adult novel. And I didn't know what people would think. Like, I didn't know if people would think it was too voicey or too plotty or too complicated structurally. But I feel like a lot of that stuff is you can get away with in YA, and I didn't know what you could get away with in adults. So I feel like I am a YA novelist because that's what I was trained as. But I think all of those skills can apply, for an adult novel, obviously. So, but I think they're good skills that I learned in terms of storytelling. I feel like storytelling is the most important thing in YA. And so that's really central to who I am as a writer, no matter what I'm doing. I think it's there in my memoir too. I feel like I was thinking when I was writing my memoir, oh, this is kind of, I'm using all the skills I have as a YA writer, but I'm writing a memoir for adults. So yeah, but thanks for that question, Bridget.
Thanks, Bridget. We have another question from Emily Flot. Oh, and Emily and then it's Alexander Lumens. Hi, Lumens. They're asking, I guess together collectively, how you arrived at the specific order of the chapters and parts, which is also a question that I had as well. Just because it seems to me that I'm sure there was a lot of thought in terms of what came when, because like we were talking about earlier, if you, some of the darker endings or some of the perhaps, more questionable choices, it seemed to me that they came a little bit later. And I wondered if that, how did you come to the order of this? Great question.
I think my first priority, because there was going to be 9, I wanted to give the reader sort of one whole arc of Rose in the beginning to hang on to, so that they sort of knew her a little bit and knew her marriage. So the very first whole arc of Rose, you kind of get all together, more or less. Because I thought, okay, like that's gonna be our foundation. And then I'm gonna sort of build from there. So I basically start with one Rose and then I start going in different directions. And I do a couple at a time in each section. And then once you're past the first section, the ones from the prior section interject also. So it was almost like braiding. Oh, you know what I thought of it? I thought of it as rounds of row your boat. And where, if you're singing. And so this is, again, it's kind of like math. Or I was thinking about like the pocket bell canon, when you have like different melodies that like come in and out, and then there's like minor chords and major chords. And so I was sort of imagining that it's like I was weaving, and that at different points, like I knew a new voice how to come in. And so, and a lot of it had to do with, I was developing Rose and all her stories, but all throughout, I'm also developing the other characters. And so even though Rose changes all throughout, the other characters, except for her husband, a little bit, all the other characters remain steady. So I'm building one arc for each of them all throughout the book. So like I wanted the reader to have those to hang on to, so they wouldn't get too confused, because they also had to like see all these different Roses. But it was like a, it felt like a song or something, like a rounds of a song that I was directing. So I'm always looking for these metaphors of like how to describe writing. And this one, maybe I'm like conducting a symphony kind of thing. Oh, there's another question from Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca.
Do you want to read it, or should I read here? I can read it here. So Rebecca asks, can you talk about how you negotiate a writing life and the pull of the internet pre-pandemic, but also during the past year, when so many aspects of life are channeled through phone and computer?
Oh, Rebecca knows me well. So I don't have it with me. So I don't have a smartphone, and I've never had a smartphone. And for me to write, when I get up in the morning, I unplug the internet from the wall so that I can't, I literally physically unplug it. Except one of the things that's been really challenging during the pandemic is that my husband needs the internet to work. So before I could unplug the internet and then he could go off to work, and he didn't need the internet. But now that he does, and we're both home, I downloaded Freedom because I need space from the internet. I need to not toggle over to email, and I need big blocks of time. So I really work hard to keep out all of that noise. And I have to say, so I am on Instagram, which is new for me this year. I decided to try it, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been fun to meet booksellers and people. I know I'm connected with you now, Kimberly, and I've really enjoyed it. But yesterday was like, for a long time, I went on it like once a week, and that would be it. And there were times when I forgot I had started an Instagram account early on, and there's one time I didn't go on for like 2 months, and then I thought, oh, I'm not good at this. But then yesterday, when my book came out, there was like a frenzy online, which was so fun. And there were all these people tagging me and following me, and I was like, oh, I have to respond to everybody. And it felt like a full-time job. And I thought, how do people do this? Like this, I can do this for 1 day or 2 days, but then I have to like I'm never gonna write another book if I am on Instagram like this. So it was fun to do for a day, but I've met my limit, I think. So
I love that you don't have a smartphone. I love that. It's rare. I think there's this feeling of like, well, and like you said, you know, your book is out, so you want people to know about it, and you're happy and excited to talk about it and whatever. But it truly is. I mean, there are people whose whole jobs are to do this, obviously, to sort of manage it. But it also just has speaking of fractured time, or just the way that we relate to our streams of ideas, like, you know, constant interruption is certainly a factor when you're talking about social media. But I will say, Instagram, I find to be the safest of the social media options. It just feels nicer. Like the community feels nicer. It feels less, you know, there's less likely to be like a huge discussion in threads. It's more just like, look at this thing, and people are nice, and you can kind of move on.
I love this book. It's so great.
Yeah, exactly. And pictures, of course, which is just, you know, it's always nice to have photos of things, and it kind of does the communicating for you that, you know, otherwise is trickier. Let's see. So I'm looking at, so Emmy says, hi, Donna, you're amazing. What was the biggest thing you learned working on this book that you'll take with you going forward?
That's a good question. I think that I love writing novels for adults. So after I wrote my memoir, I really think my writing changed when I wrote my memoir, because I let myself write with such urgency because the topic felt so urgent. And so after I finished that book, I decided like I want to write like that again. And I just asked myself what feels urgent. That's what I'm going to do. That's going to be my guide, what feels urgent. And the topic of motherhood came up, and I thought, oh yeah, like that feels really urgent to me. And I want to keep writing with this intense momentum. And I really loved writing it, and I loved putting to work all the skills I guess I've gained as a writer over the years to doing something totally different. And maybe the thing that I learned most was that I shouldn't be afraid of writing something that, like, when I was writing Rose, I kept thinking no one's gonna want this because I really just let myself, I guess, push what I thought might be some boundaries about this topic. Like I let Rose have all the thoughts I thought I wasn't allowed to have about motherhood, about marriage. And it felt really good to say them, but I also wondered if like people could bear them, if they could bear Rose, or if she was going to be too flawed for people to be okay with. And so I think maybe that's something that I took away, was that it was okay to sort of write this character that was as complex and as complicated as Rose is. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed writing novels for adults, and I want to do it again. So
there's a great sort of potentially an ending note, unless there's another question that comes through, but this is a question from Molly Millwood, who's asking, saying nice things about you and nice things about me, and then asking if you could talk about your hopes for this book beyond the obvious hope that lots of people read it and love it. And this is you've written many books at this point, so I wonder if you have maybe different expectations for this book versus some of your other books, or just what are your big hopes?
I've been really excited. It's been exciting to see what is it like to publish a novel for adults? What is that world like? What are some of the new conversations I'll be a part of because I'm publishing in another space in the literary world? And I've been really excited about that. And I think, one of the other things I feel excited about is that it's going to come out in a whole bunch of different countries. And I've always wished for a book to sell in a lot of different countries. And I've had like dribs and drabs over the years where like, my book sells in France, or, I think my book sold in Russia once or something, and well, there's very intense merengue music outside. I don't know if you can hear it. But I feel excited to be in conversations with people around the world. And I just feel grateful that people have been excited about this book. So yeah, so I do hope lots of people read it. I would say the other thing is, though, the thing I most hope is that Rose as a character is flexible enough and to accommodate a diversity of women's experiences. Like, I really hope that this isn't like a polemic about motherhood or not having children or anything like that. Like, it's really a book about choices, and I hope that readers see themselves spoken for regardless of where they are on this issue. Like, I hope there's something for them in that book, because it was meant to, I guess, I have such a diversity of women in my life, and it was in a lot of ways meant to like hold all of them too. And so I hope that readers, find themselves in the book when they read it. So.
That was definitely one of the things that I felt as it went on to sort of, I was hoping for one or two storylines, and then I got them, and it was this very rewarding feeling to be like, oh good, this did happen. Or I was wondering about this, if you were going to go to this, I don't want to ruin it. So I was wondering if you were going to go to this place and you went there, which was really neat to see all of the different ways. And you're right, it is, it's everyone. I mean, I have kids and whatever, but it's for people who, it's for women. It's for any woman who's ever had a body, which is all the women. There's a last question from Rebecca. Another question: where do you see or otherwise experience overlaps between nonfiction and fiction writing? I'm wondering what kinds of satisfaction each brings and whether one process nourishes the other.
That's a nice question. Maybe we can end on that one. I think sometimes I have two brains. One brain does nonfiction and the other brain does fiction. And it kind of feels like a relief to switch between them. Because when I'm writing nonfiction, I have to be so careful with my research and so attentive to detail and to endnotes and quotations from, the different research subjects that I'm interviewing. And it's so particular and specific and grueling in a lot of ways. And then with fiction, it kind of feels like you're flying, because you're not being like tethered down by endnotes. You get to just make stuff up. And so after writing a nonfiction project, it kind of feels like a relief to write fiction. And so I really enjoy going back and forth between them. But I definitely think that because I interview people for my research, I do a lot of sociological research, kind of like Rose does in the book. And I feel like it helps me be thinking about like what is interesting, like what's going on in the world. I'm always asking questions and listening to people's stories. And so I think the nonfiction work is really helpful for me, and just thinking about like, what do I really care about? What feels urgent in the world? And the people I interview often help me realize what that is. And so yeah, and then sometimes when I'm going from fiction to nonfiction, it feels like a relief to not have to make anything up, to have to be so diligent with my research and to have everything, all the details there from the interviews that I'm doing for my work. So, but I do really like doing both. I go through phases where I think, that's it, I'm not doing fiction anymore. I'm only doing novels. And then I start a nonfiction project and suddenly I'm doing another nonfiction project. So I always seem to go back and forth between them.
Well, this has been so nice to talk to you tonight. And I know that this is just the beginning of a really long, exciting journey with this book. And I wanted to hold it up one last time so people can go and buy it from Exile and get a signed book plate. And yeah, and thank you so much for talking. And I guess Javier is going to say something at the end here, but it's been such a pleasure to talk to you tonight.
Thank you, Kimberly, for all your questions and for everybody who came tonight. It's so nice to see many of your faces on the top of the screen and have your questions.
I have a question though before we go for the both of you, and you guys have both contributed music to Exile. If anyone out there is confused about our name, it's an homage to Exile in Guyville, which is a seminal album by Liz Phair that was recorded in Chicago. It has Chicago roots. So we're running this book thing with the idea of having books and music sort of coexist in the same space. And if you get a chance, go to our website and you can, Donna put together a really great Spotify playlist that you can listen to. And I just wonder, Kimberly talked about this before too, like how does music affect your writing? Do you listen to music while you're writing? Do you think about music while you're writing fiction, and if it fits into the certain scenes in your books? I'm always fascinated with, and everyone has a different story, but I'm just curious if you guys can talk about that for a second.
You go first, Donna.
Yeah, I don't listen to music when I'm writing. I can't, because I have to, maybe because I have to like listen for the voices of my characters. But I do like to, I like to walk around. I have an old iPod because I don't have a smartphone. So I have an old iPod, and I when I go for walks, sometimes I'll listen to music on my iPod, and I like to like think to music when I'm wandering, but I don't like to have it on in the house when I'm writing. Or the only time we have it on in the house is when I'm like cooking, or if we decide we have to be dancing. So. What about you, Kimberly?
I can't listen to music while I'm actually drafting, just because so much of the way that I write is about acoustics and sonics and the way that the friction between words and stuff, and I find that it gets kind of thrown off. But I listen to music almost constantly when I'm not actually drafting something. So, but I was noticing, or actually I had a friend ask me, like, are you okay? You're listening to the same record so much on Spotify. And I was like, yes, I do this thing where I'll sort of, a record will sort of speak to a project that I'm doing, like whether it's a short story or a novel. And so I just only listen to that record for like a month. I mean, I listen to other things, but I'll like mainly listen to one record. And I don't know, something about whether it's the lyrics or something about the mood of it, just sort of like, I like the feeling of it seeping into the work. But yeah, music is tremendously important to me. I also like play music. So I play music as a sort of break from writing, which is something that, is helpful, but yeah.
Well, thanks. Thank you guys everyone for coming out tonight, for everyone that tuned in, and thank you, Donna and Kimberly. Donna, we love your book. It's one of my favorites of the year so far, and it's funny that you mentioned your aversion to Instagram. I have the same aversion to social media, and if I could tune everything out, I would. But it's funny that we met that way, that you had reached out, and we get these periodically, authors reaching out and wanting us to carry books, and even though we're not a physical bookstore yet, but I'm so glad that we made that connection, and that you were so eager to send a copy of your book out, and read it as soon as I got it. I received it, and it took us to here. So thank you so much for being here tonight. You can purchase Donna's book. It'll be in hardcover, not in softcover. And also, please pick up Kimberly's book as well. We will have signed book plates for both books, should you purchase those, and other options for book purchases on our website. Thanks again for everybody for coming out tonight. It was a wonderful conversation, and have a good night. If you guys can just stick around for a few seconds afterwards, though, just for 2 seconds. Thanks everyone for showing up. Have a good night.
Thanks everybody for coming. So nice.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.